We're here to do the team preview for everybody's favorite delusional fan base, the Miami Heat. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I'm a big ROAS man. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter, as always, at @redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. So here we are. Hit the thumb up, the follow, the double bang, audio, video. You can leave comments on Spotify audio podcasts now, which I've found out. I don't know how I'm going to be notified of them, but go leave those comments. Maybe it does something. Who knows? Brand new world, the new frontier. That's what we're on about. All right, we're talking Miami Heat before we get into that. Just quickly, who's ready for an early sidebar here? My partner started watching Below Deck, right? So, of course, that means I'm watching Below Deck. And the Below Deck, this is the original one in Aruba. And the captain of the boat is Australia, Captain Kerry. And I listened to the big fella talk. And then it really hits me. Like, man, like us, Australians, we talk so fast. And I listen to that guy and I go, mate, slow down. And I realize that I talk fast as well. But that guy really, ramps it up. So apologies for the speed of me naturally talking at 1.5x speed. That's just how we talk. We run our words together. I do my best to try and enunciate and spread it as much as possible. That's what she said. But apologies. Shout out to Captain Kerry. All right, we are ready to talk Miami Heat. So let's just talk about the Miami Heat. All right, so he's back here again to talk about the Miami Heat. David Ramil, welcome back to the show.
It's been a while, but glad to always talk Heat basketball with you.
Just got you and Wes sort of shifting back and forward as to who comes on, but I've got you this year. I think I had you on here last year as well, as we were talking about this Heat team moving forward, and that's exactly what we're here to do again, David. Bit of a quiet offseason, not as quiet as some other teams, but not a lot really going on in Miami.
No, they really were limited in what they could do. Andy Ellisberg, the general manager for the team, said in another show at some point over the offseason that their major transaction this summer was the acquisition of Terry Rozier last season, during the trade deadline or right before the trade deadline. And so they were kind of limited. They're paying him a lot of salary. Obviously, they had to move Kyle Lowry because he wasn't really producing at all. He wasn't worth the $30 million that he was being paid as an expiring contract. And so they wanted to make a push, considering that they were going to be able to probably go on another deep playoff run last year. Obviously, that didn't work because Rozier and Butler both injured as the playoffs began, and what was left of the Heat wasn't particularly good or deep or talented and just weren't able to challenge the eventual champion Boston Celtics. So, yeah, this offseason has been a quiet one. Lost some players, were able to re-sign Haywood Highsmith, who I'm sure we'll talk about, and they were able to add veteran Alec Burks to the fold. So we'll see how that goes. I'm not optimistic about what role Burks will have, but a lot of people seem to think they're getting this really plus offensive player who's going to be able to contribute at a high level and add some much needed depth to Miami's roster. But we'll see how it all pans out.
I can't imagine the feeling of being excited about Alec Burks joining, but whatever. He didn't have the greatest season last season. But let's transition to talk about the guys that did actually join this team. Burks was one of them. And then it was just a couple of draft picks. Kel'El Ware in the first round, Pele Larson in the second round. Keshad Johnson, who was probably one of the more heralded two-way players, or he's now on a two-way contract, but unsigned players through the Summer League period. And then Josh Christopher, who went crazy during Summer League as well. He's here for his, I say his third chance in the NBA, but I think he probably didn't get a fair shake in those first couple of spots. So he's on a two-way as well, and he joins in, but that is a good time, David, for us to talk about the drafting and the addition of Kel'El Ware. Superman comes in at pick number 15. he was super impressive, obviously, in Summer League. He was one of the better big men there. He was a player that was criticized in college for issues with alleged laziness or lack of focus, which I guess is true from some of his time at Oregon, not really at Indiana, but he blocks shots. He's ridiculously athletic. He is huge. He can shoot a little bit. I thought he was a clear lottery player, verging on top 10. I would say that most people would think that is probably true at this point. I guess the big question here with Kel'El, who had like a 26 usage through Summer League, is what's the role going to be? Is he Bam Adebayo's 14-minute-a-night backup? Is he a starter? Does he switch and play with Bam and get 20 minutes a night? Because there are a lot of people who go, well, they drafted him and Bam's going to move to the 4 now. Like, where do you think this goes?
It's tough to kind of project that because I don't think he's ready. His shooting is not consistent enough, and neither is Bam's. And so if you're going to replace Nikola Jovic, the projected starter at forward, and you're going to replace him with Bam Adebayo, and while he's certainly shown an uptick in his three-point shooting, I don't know that we can count on that consistently. With Kel'El, I don't know that he's going to shoot. So you have these two non-shooters at the bigs. Jimmy Butler, while he continues to test the three-point shot, I wouldn't call him a shooter. And so you're kind of putting a stranglehold on an offense that has been pretty difficult to watch over the last couple of seasons. So I don't see him as a starter. I think a lot of people are optimistic that he's just this plug-and-play guy that can go block shots, add athleticism and length to a roster that really needed it. But I just don't think the fit with Bam is there yet. It's not to say it won't be, but I just don't think it's going to be there at the start of the season unless he's put in some tremendous amount of work in between Summer League where he did not have the shooting touch at all. And when the training camp starts in about a month or so, I just don't see that he's going to make this huge transformation. I think he's going to be more of a backup role player moving forward. Although I think there's going to be minutes where we see that tested, where you see Bam and Kel'El sharing the floor a little bit because they don't have much options. Other than Kel'El, you've got Kevin Love, who was the backup center last year. He's fine, but obviously a year older. You've got Thomas Bryant. They re-signed him. I don't know that he's going to be able to make much more of an impact than he did last year. And you want to be able to at least test a rookie and see what you can do. Although Eric Spoelstra, notoriously known for not playing rookies very frequently, although I think he's kind of expanded that a little bit. And certainly last year with Jaime Jaquez, he was kind of forced to put Jaime out on the floor because he was just such a competent player as a rookie. So I don't see that Ware's going to get a lot of minutes, but I think you're probably spot on in that he's going to be that 14-minute-a-night backup for Bam.
Yeah, I think people we need to have a bunch of sort of realistic ideas about this. Like, he was great. I think he's going to be good. He was also picked 15 in a pretty weak draft. Didn't show that shooting touch. I do think he is going to be good, but it's not like one of these things where we'll talk about Jovic in a second, but they've been working on Jovic. It's the third year. He started a big chunk of last year's games. He improved a lot. They've been putting this development in. I don't think they're going to go, well, you know what? We're going to change everything now, and we're going to try and start these two centers, and bam, you're learning a new position while a 20-year-old rookie who we're not really sure how it fits comes in and starts straight away. He might, but it doesn't seem to me to be the initial realistic path. Now, David, you can confirm this for me. I'm going to call this guy Superman all the way through because his parents named him after Superman, didn't they?
Yes, they did. Yeah, it's Kal-El in the Superman universe, but apparently, it's pronounced somewhat a little differently, Khalil, I think, or Kal-El. But I mean, it's close enough. So yeah, Superman. It should be a good nickname. I hope it sticks.
That's so weird to me. So they named him after Superman, but they said, but we're just going to pronounce it differently. Okay, all right, whatever. Anyway, Superman. There he is. He is. Yeah, it's a key piece, and I do think he can develop into a really strong player for this team. We are going to get to talk about the guys who left this team and what the Heat do in that situation. But first of all, today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. You guys know that it can be tough with so many different things that go on throughout life, kids, work, school, all those responsibilities you have. But self-care needs to be a non-negotiable. Maybe that is going to the gym, but maybe it's going to therapy. You won't skip leg day, but maybe you shouldn't skip therapy day either. And BetterHelp can make it easier for you to get that help that you need. So, when you are thinking of starting therapy, you should be looking at BetterHelp. Finding a way to prioritize and get your schedule in sync with everything in your life is a key way to improving overall well-being and mental health. So, with BetterHelp, you go online, you fill out a questionnaire, they match you with a therapist that they think is going to be the best fit, but let's be really clear with this. It might not be. And if you don't vibe with your therapist, well, you tell BetterHelp and they say, okay, cool, let's find a new one. Because getting that match is key. If you don't have a relationship, a rapport with your therapist, it just isn't going to work, and BetterHelp will find that new therapist for you free of charge. So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. David, is there any truth to the rumor that Kevin Love considered leaving Miami or retiring because he was voted the second most attractive man in the Miami Heat circles behind you?
No.
Didn't happen?
No. That wasn't it. No, I think
he wasn't getting jealous or anything.
Well, I mean, that's natural, but there's only so much you can do. I mean, you can't come at the king, So that hierarchy has been established for a while. Kevin's aware of it, and I'm sure he took it all in stride pretty easily. I'm glad to see him back for a couple of years at least, and maybe if I give up podcasting, he can eventually take over that spot if he's still around.
He's got to learn the ropes. Let's talk about the guys who did leave this team. We've got Caleb Martin, DeLon Wright, Patty Mills, Orlando Robinson, and Jamal Cain, who's just the name that people think, oh, yeah, Jamal Cain, he plays for the Heat. No, he actually went to the Pelicans now, so yeah, he's not there. But let's talk about the one who is the biggest loss there. I don't think it's really a big surprise here. DeLon Wright, pretty good player, but only arrived halfway through the season. Patty Mills, not really sure how he got that guaranteed contract apart from locker room stuff, but the one we want to talk about here is Caleb Martin, who was the starting power forward for chunks of the season. He did battle some injuries last season. This team had so many rotating casts of different starters, so it's hard to sort of pin all that stuff down. But we heard it, David, plenty of times about the contract that he allegedly rejected from Miami to take less money to go to Philadelphia. Putting that sort of to the side, if that was true? Like, what was the falling out issue here? Do you think it's one of those ones where there's been like, well, Caleb, you are clearly a backup, and Jaime maybe is taking your minutes, and Jovic is going to start, so your role's not as big here? Like, what do you think that issue was, or maybe what it was?
Yeah, it was kind of just a mishandling from his agent's part. They thought that they would be able to test free agency and get a lot bigger of a contract. So when Miami initially offered that deal, they felt, it was a great offer. We appreciate it. We'd love to stay, but we don't want to stay for this amount. And so when they made the offer, it was quickly pulled back and said, okay, go ahead and test free agency. And as we saw this summer, a lot of people who thought they were going to be able to get a lot more money did not. Caleb was one of them. He wound up taking a lesser deal. And yes, it was to contend, to play for a contender in Philadelphia and maybe get himself an assured spot, although I don't think that's necessarily a given either. But I don't think he didn't have a grievance with his role. I think he would have been happy being a part of this organization. He was really grateful over the years that he was here for them basically salvaging his NBA career when he was cut from Charlotte and given an opportunity to contend here. And so I think he would have preferred staying here for more money. No, looking back now, I'm sure he won't publicly say he has any regrets, but I'm sure he has regrets not accepting that offer when Miami initially made it.
When we talk about the Heat, and this has been the case for the last couple of years, David, we looked at it and go, man, like, who are their power forwards, right? Like, they don't have any forwards. And now there's not, like, depth necessarily, but there is Nikola Jovic. There is the re-signing of Haywood Highsmith, who really can only play at the 4. We've talked about maybe some crossover, Bam and Ware minutes. So, like, and Martin held that 4 role down. Whatever he was the 4, whether Jimmy Butler was 4, whatever. Like, they both played forwards and that sort of position. So, they, not to say that Miami's in a huge position of strength at that spot, but it is a little bit more secure, a little bit more, they've got a few more sort of clear directions of which they're going in that position, which does bring us into talk now about the starting, or your projected starting group, which is the same as my projected starting group for this team. We're talking Terry Rozier, Tyler Herro, Jimmy Butler, Nikola Jovic, and Bam Adebayo. Now, Jovic was someone who is one of those players that had this, people had this idea of him, numerous reasons. He's white, he's tall. All right, he's Eastern European, so people immediately thought shooter. He sounds like he's Nikola Jokic, so people said, man, what a massive steal that he got him in the 20s. I thought that was about the right spot. I thought he was pretty disappointing early on. But I would say halfway through last season, he is still really young. I think he's younger than Brandon Miller, and Anderman and Asar Thompson. Like, he's really young. It's halfway through last season, they committed to him to being a starter in the, you're a starter but not a finisher, a 22-minute-a-night player. And I thought he took big steps forward. How do you view Jovic as we move forward? Now, you have him as a starter. I think he's a clear starter. Is that a 22-minute starter? Is it a 27-minute starter? Do you think they're putting more on his plate this year heading into year 3 for Jovic?
I think so. At the same time, I think with Spoelstra, there'll be a quick hook there because he just feels more comfortable going to somebody like Highsmith who can go in there and provide something at an elite level, specifically defense, that Jovic at this point in time cannot. Now, he's made incredible leaps of defender, and that's why he got more playing time last year. With Eric Spoelstra, it's always the work behind the scenes. We're never privy to it. We don't even know. A guy who might not play for large stretches of the season all of a sudden gets this added boost. And that's a lot of what happened with Jovic too. He was committed to his role, played, did a lot of work behind the scenes, and then he was gifted when injuries kind of really ravaged his team. He was given the starting opportunity, and I think he made the most of it. But we saw that he had a quick hook last year, and I think that'll probably continue. I'm not sure what his role is because I think he is still versatile enough where he can do a lot. Certainly the shooting became much more consistent. He was almost 40% from three. I think there's the ability for him to create some offense for himself, although he's still his handle is not quite the tightest, but he is a good passer. He's a good playmaker. He has height, something Miami absolutely lacked before drafting Ware. So I think he can bring the ball up court. We saw I think with him, he flourishes mostly. And what I've always made a comparison, I know it might seem outlandish, but I always compare him to Lamar Odom as a point forward kind of guy. He pulls down that rebound and he just goes and he just starts the fast break opportunity, looking to ignite an offense that was really, really sluggish and slow. And so I thought that was his best tool, was really being able to provide that, and then eventually coming around as kind of a spot up shooter. But I don't know exactly how they're going to utilize him other than just the fifth starter. And maybe that's fine. Maybe he can continue to grow and develop as a result, but I don't know that he's going to get a lot of plays called for him. And it's up to him. It's incumbent on him to continue to develop and grow as an individual player. And I think he'll get that opportunity. Again, I still think he should be the starter just based on his talent, his size. He provides the versatility to complement Bam Adebayo, and his defense isn't as bad as it was when he was a first-year player. So I think he'll continue to be better next year.
The thing with what you said there about him being the key thing is the passing and the handling of the ball. That was the key selling point for him out of the draft. Again, people say, well, he's 6'10" and he's from I don't know if you think he's Serbian, so he can shoot. Like, not really. Like, I'm not sure he can shoot. The thing that he does is be able to dribble and pass. But the problem, I think, I agree with you that he's going to start, is that everyone else in that starting lineup, Herro, Rozier, Butler, and Bam, they all have the ball in their hands. They all initiate offense. They all do any of that. So I don't really see where he ever has that chance to do it. So while I do think he starts and he's going to have those minutes, that opportunity to do that is not there, really, unless there are players who are unavailable, because every one of those guys are going to be prioritized. He's not playing with a defense-only two-guard. He's not playing with a rim-running center. Like, he's playing with all these guys who handle, dribble, pass, and do all of these things. So that does sort of negate part of that skill that he brings. In terms of the bench players, David, we've got Josh Richardson, whose season ended early last season. Duncan Robinson, who came out of nowhere to sort of rejuvenate his career. There's Jaime Jaquez, there's Haywood Highsmith, Kevin Love, and Kel'El Ware. I do want to talk about Jaquez here because obviously he was very impressive as a rookie last season. It exceeded the production you normally get from someone in that spot. There were, again, people are well aware of my thoughts on Jaquez, and I pushed back on some of the insanity of the early season where people were talking about him as a top 3 player. And I said, look, okay, I think that if you get someone as a very, very strong role player, whether that's 6-man, 5th starter from that pick, and that's what Jaquez, I think, could be, like, that's an unbelievable result. And he shot well above his head to be in the season. But then as the season went on, a lot of that stuff sort of pulled back down. Now, there'll be a lot of people who think, well, Jaquez will just start on this team and he'll play at the 4. Where do you see, like, Jaime's role, who again, started out hot, slowed down, was better at the end of the season? Like, what is his not number one thing, but what is the ideal outcome for him this season? Is there another step? Because again, we've got Rozier, Herro, Butler, Adebayo, all these guys who are going to have the ball in preference to him. So where does it sit? Like, what is the ideal outcome here?
I think he's a team sixth man. I think, you could make a case for either Rozier or Herro. And I know a lot of people, especially Heat fans, and a pretty loud contingent of them are just done with Tyler and just think he should be relegated back to the bench, which was, obviously a role he thrived in a couple seasons ago. But I think Jaquez will be the sixth man. And he's such a seamless fit with what Jimmy can do in terms of him bringing the ball up, initiating, just kind of attacking the rim with purpose and finishing at a pretty high level around the rim. His shooting is still the biggest problem, though. Yeah. And unless he emerges as a much improved shooter, I think he's going to have a similar role to what he did last year in terms of minutes and everything else. It's just, he's going to get the occasional start because Jimmy's going to miss time because he's going to get hurt at some point. And Jaquez kind of fills it perfectly. Like, you don't miss much, honestly, except for the whole closer mentality and the ability to draw fouls at a high level. But even still, as a rookie, I think Jaquez did an amazing job of being able to draw fouls because, his spin move is the way he rolls to the rim. He initiates contact. He doesn't shy away from it. He's big enough and strong enough, but he doesn't exceed in everything and anything particularly well. And so I just don't know if the book isn't out on him or wasn't out on him as a rookie last year, despite the fact that he played 4 years at UCLA. And I wonder how teams are going to defend him differently in his second season, whether or not he's going to take a sophomore slump year or make a leap. I don't know. I'm curious. My guess would be that he continues to do what he did, and we'd have kind of occasional games where he really excels and occasional games where he looks like a second-year player with a limited ceiling. And I think that's kind of where we'll be with Jaquez. But as a sixth man is probably his best role.
Yeah, look, I agree with all that. And again, people will always, a lot of people push back on those thoughts that I had on him last season. But we saw, like, in the end, he shot 32% from three after being a 40% shooter for the first 6 weeks or whatever, meaning that there was a big stretch where he was going at like 28, 29% from three, which obviously doesn't cut it as a guy that's where you're going to have some of that value. He was only an 18% usage guy, which, again, as a rookie is really good, but he wasn't, like, dominating the ball and you're controlling things, I think, the way that people thought that he was when this team was fully healthy. And that's the thing, is they're probably not going to be fully healthy all season, but when they are, like, we've got to sort of find that right hierarchical role. And then even with that bench group, like Josh Richardson is a pretty solid player. And even Duncan Robinson, like, he started a ton of games last season. He stepped up, but his role is also a confusing one now because, again, if they're healthy, he played 20 minutes maybe, 21 minutes? Like, he's not going to play those 29 minutes that he played last season. And for a team that we had some concerns about their depth last season, if we get even average health, like they do feel a little bit deeper now.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that assessment. I think, you get Jaquez in his second year, you add Ware and Larson, although I'm not sure Larson's going to have much of a role. You got Highsmith back, and even with the loss of Caleb Martin, everybody thinks, they lost a starter, a guy who's been instrumental in their playoff runs in the last couple of seasons. But that was not really by design. It was more out of necessity because who the hell else did they have on this roster? They didn't have a lot of depth. They were always bogged down by injury. And while that might still be the case, assuming, like you said, that they're even close to regular health, everybody's going to get a turn, but nobody's going to really dominate. It's just a deeper group overall that can still function pretty well because you have to give credit to Eric Spoelstra for being able to maximize whatever lineups he has. Duncan's role is a really interesting one. I'm glad you brought it up because, again, he showed off the ability to put the ball down and attack the rim, and he was really, really good at it. And obviously the three-point shooting and the gravity he creates is still there. And it was kind of a resurgent year for him. But he would say, and he's told us many times, he didn't do anything differently, just continued to put the work in. This is always who he's been. He's just feeling a little bit more comfortable in this role. Now, I think the year before when he really took a step back, I think it was the pressure of the contract and everything else. You saw Max Strus coming up also. I think he just, teams were defending him differently. And now he's kind of found that rhythm, how to make impact plays. I think his defense has continued to improve too. So I'm curious. It is a deeper group. So many different players can stand out on any given night. And I don't know how Spo is going to blend it all together. But if I have faith in any coach being able to do it, it would be him.
It seems really unlikely to me that both Robinson and Jaquez, who averaged 28 minutes a night last season, that they're going to hit that number. That would mean that somebody, again, Rozier's here the whole season instead of 10 games or whatever he ended up playing in the regular season. And just everyone else has to fit around. It is just hard to see how that can work. We are going to talk about Terry Rozier, who arrived mid-season, in just a sec. But today's episode is also brought to you by the Game Time app. Game Time, first of all, is an authorized ticket reseller for Major League Baseball games. So when you're looking for a ticket to go see a Major League Baseball game, maybe you're looking to see the whatever's left of the Miami Marlins. Who knows? you might be doing that. And, maybe the cost of a game time ticket is worth more than the Marlins' overall payroll. That's probably not true because game time is really cheap. And in fact, the closer that you get to game time, the cheaper the tickets get, because I don't know, maybe that's why they named it game time. You get close to game time and we give you cheaper tickets. The flash deals, the zone deals, the all-in pricing, which you can turn on the app so that the price that you see is the price that you pay. I don't know why you'd want to go anywhere else. So whether it is Major League Baseball or sports or concerts or comedy or theater, whatever, game time should be your number one option to go and check that out. So take the guesswork out of buying those Major League Baseball tickets, concert tickets. Do it with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create the account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Lowest price guaranteed. That does bring me, David, to talk, as I put the wrong screen up. That's my bad. All right, we're talking injuries because Terry Rozier came across in a pre-trade deadline deal, and then, not to be unfair to him, something happened to his neck. I don't really know what it was, so can you tell me what happened and what's going on with his neck?
It was a tweak of some kind, like that. I think that's kind of how he explained it. Like he took a shot, and he thought after the game, the adrenaline and everything else, he was fine, and then the next day he could barely move. And from there, it was kind of the slow progress and not knowing exactly what's happening. And this is an organization that is extremely tight-lipped with injuries, especially the amount of injuries they've had. And so they didn't really go into much detail, and there was still optimism that he'd be able to make a return for the playoffs. That didn't happen. And so, he's healthy, though. He made an appearance this offseason at a local kids basketball clinic, and he spoke that he's 100%. He's doing the work. He's available. He's going to be ready from day one. So I'm curious to see how that fits now, because the balance was a difficult one for Terry, like to find, like he's long admired Dwayne Wade. He's been a fan of Dwayne Wade. He was kind of stashed there in Charlotte for a long time. And then he was acquired by Miami with the hopes that he would salvage their season. And I think he took that pressure, and it was too much for him to bear because he couldn't really find a comfortable rhythm, didn't know exactly how to play alongside those guys, was a lot more deferential than you'd expect from Scary Terry. And then eventually he was like, you know what? I could get mine. I know when to do. He took a couple of big shots in clutch situations down the stretch, and he was solid overall. Still Terry Rozier. So you're going to get some inefficient. But any thoughts that he was going to be able to translate his production in Charlotte into this Miami Heat roster that was competing for a playoff spot were quickly dashed. And so he just had to kind of find his rhythm. And then he winds up getting hurt right when he was playing his best basketball for the Heat. And so I don't know exactly. There are a lot of questions for this team that feels like they haven't made many changes. And yet it's incorporate a guy like Rozier. How high can their ceiling be with Terry there? What's his bounce going to be in that backcourt alongside Herro? There's a lot to answer, and we'll find out soon enough. I think he's going to be the starter. I think he's good enough. You can, kind of pick whether he or Herro should come off the bench if you want to make that argument for maybe Duncan Robinson or Haywood Highsmith, but I think he's likely to be the starter moving forward.
When he was traded across from Charlotte, I was very quick in terms of fantasy relevance to be like, this is a very different situation. He is not going to do anywhere near the things that he was doing in Charlotte, and we saw that, David. He played 4 fewer minutes per game. But you might know the answer to this. Do you know? Oh, no, I'm not going to tell you. He played more games for Miami than he did for Charlotte, which I cannot believe that is true. He played 31 games for Miami and 30 for Charlotte last season, which I am flabbergasted. Anyway, he played 4 minutes fewer for Miami. His usage went from 27 to 23.5. His shooting numbers dropped from effective field goals of 53.5 to under 50. His assist rate fell from 30 to 23. And most of those things, I think, will probably hold. The minutes, who knows? Usage down, assist rate down, yes. Shooting, no. I do think that is going to bounce back. So while I think we can look at the splits between what he did in Miami versus Charlotte and go, it makes sense that he does less in Miami. It doesn't make sense that he'd just be shooting worse the whole time. So I do think that from that baseline of where he was after he came across, there is improvement to come. But I think we have to eliminate that idea of Rozier being the same player that he was in Charlotte, because it just doesn't make sense for him to be that unless 3 or 4 guys go down and then the team's going nowhere anywhere, and then they do turn into the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah. So I think that's spot on. I think he's going to be much more comfortable putting in the work this offseason, getting a full training camp, understanding what Eric Spoelstra, like they're going to open up the plays and open up the playbook for him so that he can understand a lot more of what he's supposed to do. And now that he's established a kind of more comfortable rhythm, I agree. I think he's a huge X factor, but I think he's also going to be an improved version of what we saw over those 31 games with the Heat last year.
In terms of the player to watch, I always give the guests an opportunity to sort of interpret this how they want to do it and give me that option of the guy that they want to talk about. And David, I was a little surprised that the player that you put on here as the guy you want to watch as Bam Adebayo. So tell me why that is. I've got my theories about why you're focusing on Bam as the guy to watch, but what are we looking at here for Adebayo for the season?
It's an interesting pivot point for him because I think, we had the reported contractual issues with Jimmy Butler at the start of the offseason. And then there was the tension from Pat Riley's end of season press conference where he calls out Jimmy and tells him basically shut the hell up, that, guys that don't play during the playoffs shouldn't talk about how their team performed or whether or not his availability would have made any difference against the Celtics. They seem to have squashed that. I don't know how much of a beef it actually was. They're kind of cut from the same cloth in terms of they like being pushed, they like being challenged, but you get those kind of two personalities going at each other. It doesn't always work. We'll see. We'll see if there's any tension. Now, Jimmy and his agent, or Jimmy's agent, or I should say specifically, have been very adamant that Jimmy has high contract demands. And so you're looking at a potential Butler trade at some point. And I thought it would happen this summer. I thought this summer would start off with them clearing the decks right away. And I don't know if that's going to happen right now. I think they saw the market and how it was playing it out. And they said, you know what, we'll continue to stay this year, the final year of the contract, and then elect to get an extension the following summer for a huge amount. I don't know how it's going to play out. I think a trade is still a possibility if Miami starts off really badly. But my reason for pointing out Bam is, one, as we talked about, the potential of the three-point shooting and how much that's going to be a consistent force, or whether or not they make a shift, however small it might be, or even a seismic one, to the idea that this is Bam's team moving forward, that they can already see the window of the Jimmy Butler era closing, whether it's sometime during the season or next offseason, but it's soon. And knowing that we have to start making the shift internally to turning the keys to the car over to Bam Adebayo as quickly as possible. And I don't know that Bam wants that necessarily. I don't know if Bam's capable of it. I think there's a leap for him to take in terms of his offensive production if he can hit a couple threes a game. And I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility for his skill set. It's just considering who he's been as a player his whole career, who hasn't shot the three particularly well, that's asking for a lot to all of a sudden shoot the three a lot. But I think it's kind of what's necessary in order for him to take that leap and show that he can be a top 20 player, maybe even a top 15 player in the NBA.
He made a really distinct change, I think, Bam. I was going to talk the Jimmy stuff. Actually, I'll save the Jimmy stuff because he brought up so many things I want to talk about. We'll leave that for a little bit later. But Bam, around the All-Star break, was barely taking threes. And then when he came back, and I've got this, like, he just started doing more. And I thought that was interesting. Not that he's ever going to become this knockdown shooter, but he started to change and started to hit them, or started to attempt them more, which obviously would be really important if he is going to share the court with Ware at some point. But there was that change in Bam's game, and that's, I guess, something for us to watch here. He's had many changes in his games because before Kel'El Ware arrived, we saw his assist rate was like 25%, and then it went down to like 16%, and the ball was out of his hands, and it hasn't really ever recovered back to that number, but that's a change in his game. And I don't know that he's got this elite offensive level that he can take it to, but I also don't know because we haven't seen that be positioned that way. And I am really, the Jimmy stuff, is really intriguing about that. But I do agree that there are those vibes of maybe we will make this Bam's team. Like maybe this will be how we start to transition this across. I think there is I don't say it's 100% clear, but I think we're getting to that spot pretty quickly. Now, in terms of guys that are make or breaks, again, we can frame this however we want, but you have put Tyler Herro here, and I'm just going to guess it's because A, he's chucked in every single trade report ever. Heat fans seem to be valuing him as either the best player in the world or someone they have to get rid of at all costs, often coming from the exact same people, which probably those two thoughts can't coexist within the same brain, but they do. So make or break for Herro, is this like because he is a player who he gets criticized roundly, right? But you can look at he's actually like these are pretty good numbers and he plays pretty well. But often when he's put into that role, the team struggles. So like, what is it here? Like, what's the thing with him? What does he need to do? Does he need to scale back, move back into that sixth man role, which is ideal for him longer term? Can he elevate into that number one? Like, is that like the pressure point here?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know that he can be a number one offensive engine. He's improved as a playmaker. His shooting numbers are elite, and yet there's still that kind of feeling that there's a limitation. I don't know if it's athletic. I don't know if it's just mental, psychological, or not willing to embrace his role. But his style of play. A lot of people say this, that you'll find a lot of guards around the league, guys that are just scoring first and only, and that's kind of where Herro fits in, and so he's kind of an archetype that's pretty easy to fill, and so they have limited value around the league. And with Tyler, he's been somewhat inefficient. He doesn't draw fouls at a high rate.
Yep.
There are limitations. He does shy away from contact. So all these kinds of things that have he puts limitations on his own game, and so you kind of need him to understand his best role is probably as a spot-up shooter, a catch-and-shoot guy who can put up big numbers in that regard. Let somebody else kind of create the offense. And that's why there's some optimism between that pairing between him and Terry Rozier, that maybe Terry will be more of the de facto point guard and kind of creating opportunities, and then Herro will be the beneficiary as a secondary ball handler. But we'll see how that plays out. I think with Tyler, he's got to be able to prove that there's a higher level. And I think he's gotten a pass. A lot of people criticize the front office because they may have overvalued who he was, and they gave him that big contract as coming off his rookie deal. And so you don't know what he's going to be. I still think that there's all-star potential. I think he could be a player that at the end of his career maybe has an all-star game or two under his belt. And I think that's pretty good. Again, as a mid-first round pick, that's a pretty good player in the NBA. I just, he has to be able to be much more consistent offensively and to continue to improve on the edges as far as the rest of his game, as a defender, as a playmaker. He's a really good rebounder, obviously, but even that kind of gets lost in all the discussion about Tyler. It's basically, can he take over games? I think that's what a lot of people were hoping for in the playoffs last year, that with Terry Rozier out, with Jimmy Butler out, that Tyler was going to be that number one option, and he kind of failed. He withered in that opportunity. And so there's a collective groan from the fan base that maybe he's just never going to be an elite level player, but I still am kind of cautiously optimistic that he'll get to that point.
Again, it's very easy. He's very easy to criticize. Like you can look at this guy who doesn't take the contact and doesn't defend at this extreme intensity and has the level of bravado that he has, but like he's still really good and he's improved every year, and he shoots well and he can pass. He's not a full-time point guard, but he passes well, and you look at his impact metrics, they go up every year. Like he started as a rookie as on EPM negative 3.4, and he's like a plus 1.4. Like every year just improves. Injuries killed his season. He had 2 significant injuries during the year. We expect better health there, but he's just one of those guys that in certain spots, like maybe that ties back to my original point, he's incredibly overrated, but he's also incredibly underrated by a different bunch of people. And again, the reality with most things, it sort of sits somewhere in the middle, and finding how that all plays out is always going to be key. To me, David, the major storyline on this team is the fact, I think, that their lack of activity for 2 off seasons in a row, is there. We hear all of this talk. Now, most of it is fanciful. The Heat are going to get this guy. Don't worry, this guy's coming. It's Kevin Durant. It's Damian Lillard. It's Bradley Beal. It's Donovan Mitchell. It's whoever. He's going to be a Heat. He's going to do this. And nothing has happened. To me, the question of this season is this lack of activity, not planned lack of activity. It's not like they're sitting there going, all right, we're good. We're very happy with our team. We are the best team in the world. No one's thinking that from internally, but they haven't got it done. So this, to me, the question is whether that actively starts to create a negative impact on the team or their overall results, that they just haven't been able to make those moves, whether that's star players or even the appropriate role players or bolstering the stocks of the squad and all that sort of stuff.
I think there's there have been signs over the last few years, and it's something my co-host on Locked On Heat says a lot, is, normally a team isn't, the core of the team isn't kept together for as long as this group has been without it translating into a title or something. It has to be, you have to have something tangible in order to look, yeah, we can afford to stay pat because at least we got a ring out of this. And yes, certainly they've made attempts, and Tyler's name has certainly come up a lot, but I think we're going to see more tension because there's the disease of more, which, obviously that's a phrase Pat Riley made famous years ago when he wrote his book. And so I think you're going to see Tyler wanting his name, to start establishing his legacy. Bam, perhaps, I wouldn't go so far as to say wanting to have him be the face of the franchise, but, there's certainly that possibility. Jimmy and his contract demands. All these different factors could kind of work against one another, and you could start to see some crumbling and some tension manifest in very public ways. And the Heat will diffuse it very easily. They'll say, oh, that's just Tuesday here in Miami. That's just what we do. But I wonder, without the Udonis Haslem presence, and I think that can't be overstated. A lot of people were criticizing Haslem for taking up a roster spot, but his ability to bridge the gap between the coaching staff and what the front office wanted, and the expectations of that coaching staff, and being a player as an experienced voice, a guy who's been through it all and is in the trenches, something a phrase he likes to repeat ad nauseum, and not having them on the roster last year, especially when they were going through all that injury, they could have really used somebody to kind of provide that perspective. It's like, well, you know what? Somebody going down to injury just means there's another player who's going to get an opportunity, and that's your time to shine, And I think we're going to see whether or not they can weather the storm this season. It's a really trying one. There's a lot of different factors here, as you alluded to, and I think if they can stay healthy or reasonably healthy, because again, who knows with Jimmy's age and everything else like that, if they can find a way to blend all this talent together and stay focused on the ultimate goal of winning. And I like the fact that they're not getting a lot of national television games. I like the fact that they're kind of underrated, and a lot of people think this group is probably not going to be even as good as they were last year, where they weren't particularly good in the first place. I think they use that kind of thing as motivation to say, you know what, we still know what we're all about. We'll squash all the individual stuff and just focus on the team goal, which is to win and win a lot of games. And that's why I'm kind of optimistic about this group in general. So it's a fine line. It could really crumble apart, and we'll start to see Jimmy. I don't know if he's going to go full out Minnesota Timberwolf practice squad versus the starters, or, calling out Pat Riley publicly or anything like that. But I'm curious to see if there's any drama with this group that we haven't seen as clearly and as publicly over the last few years.
The Haslam point is interesting because there's two major things that I think that he was bringing. Obviously, there's the leadership part of it, but then that part of that is like telling Jimmy, hey, shut up. Like, sit your ass down and shut up. And if you don't, well, I'm going to actually make you sit down. And there's no one else who's going to do that. The other thing is that, like, I don't know if there's enough state-based tattoos on this team. And, he's obviously the king of that. I know Tyler Herro's getting there. He's got some Milwaukee stuff across the stomach now. He's not quite there on the state-based tattoo level of Udonis Haslem. Maybe that's him. Maybe he's the new Haslem. Tyler Herro. Let's talk the burning question on this team. David, the burning question is Jimmy Butler. It is the contract situation. Now, you talked about the Pat Riley press conference, and you talked about the, I don't know how real it was. I'll tell you what I know is that I heard this in January, that there was significant ruptures, there was significant concerns, and if there was no max extension, there was a gigantic possibility of a trade happening. And I heard this back in January, and I think that was real. That is obviously what Pat Riley was getting at. But then I also think is that the way that the market played out, is that, there's this talk about Philadelphia that they went a different direction. So I don't know that Jimmy's got the market that he thinks he does. So we can talk about Minnesota Jimmy, and I'm going to take the third stringers. I don't know if he can do it anymore. Like, he's not that guy. That was 7 years ago. For as good as Jimmy is, he's not that guy anymore. So is there a part of it where Jimmy's out here like, everyone's going to give me this max, and then they went around and these agents are like, Jimmy, actually, no one's going to do it. And so maybe that pulls him back because he's not 29. He's 35, who cannot stay healthy for a season, and he can do it in spurts and pieces, but that's not that same guy. So there is a concern, and he has been cantankerous plenty of times in the past. But when you're that cantankerous and you have that level of attitude, you have to back it up. And he has.
Yeah.
But can he? Like, this is the thing, is that I don't know that he can quite do it to that level that backs up that level of attitude. And maybe the way that this is sort of pulled back into the rear view mirror now is because that realization is there. That is just speculation. But again, I heard all this months ago that he was like, max contract or get me out of here. That's how it headed. And then it was like, oh yeah, maybe not, because no one's going to pay me that.
Yeah, I think all of those points are true. I think I heard the same things, that there was a realistic possibility that things would go badly if he didn't get the deal he wanted. And I think I haven't talked to his agent over the offseason, so I can't confirm this, but I mean, I don't think they would ever say anything like this publicly, but I think they kind of realized, as many agents around the league did, is like, you know what, the market we thought would exist is not going to be there because of the CBA and everything else. And how many teams are in a position to acquire a 35-year-old player who's going to miss some regular season games of varying amounts, and who may come up big, but is in the playoffs, if he's healthy, but at the same time can blend in perfectly and not necessarily be the number one star, because he's not that guy anymore. He's not Philadelphia Jimmy Butler. He's not Minnesota Jimmy Butler. It's he took over this Heat team because they were happy to have him at the top of the hierarchy there that you mentioned before. And so I don't know. I don't know how it all plays out. I think he wants to be in Miami. I think he's comfortable here. I think he's seen that this is his team over the last 5 years. And at the same time, I think he was, and again, this is speculative on my part, I think he expected that Tyler and Bam would emerge more as the guys that could carry the team during the regular season, thus allowing him to be the closer, the playoff Jimmy. It's like, all right, you guys did, 22 points per game, 23 points per game during the regular season. Now I'll take over from here. Thanks, guys. You did the heavy work during 82 games. I'll kind of take it over, and I'll be able to carry us to the promised land. And it just hasn't worked out that way, because either through lack of effort or lack of ability, or even lack of health in Tyler's case. So I think he's got a lot to prove. I don't know what that contract looks like next year, because I agree with you. You cannot pay him that much money. And I know that's led to some issues with our fan base, but the idea that a Jimmy Butler at 36 should get close to $60 million a year is patently ridiculous. And I've made this point before. Like, aside from Kobe Bryant and Dirk Nowitzki, I can't imagine any other aging player looking at the team and saying, yeah, pay me whatever I want, as much as I want. And those guys obviously had won a lot of championship equity with those particular fan bases and played specifically for those fan bases. Jimmy has not. So I think Pat Riley in the front office is a lot more open to the idea of trading him if it comes down to that. If they can't find a comfortable middle ground next summer, I think they'll have to look to trading him. But as you said, I don't think there'll be a lot of options out there either in trying to acquire a 36-year-old player of declining ability. And I think that's fair. And I don't think it says anything bad about Jimmy. He's 35. Players decline at 35, unless you're LeBron James. And even then you've seen some minor declining, but it's that's the exception rather than the norm. And I think Jimmy has to realize that.
Yeah, you'd think so. You'd think he has to realize this. Now, there are certain things that you probably can't say about these situations, David, and that's fine. But I'll say, but you're right about this stuff, about this $60 million, and people go, yeah, but he's been a legend. Yeah, but not for Miami. Like, he didn't play his whole career in Miami, and paying someone the price of a first-team All-NBA, second-team All-NBA game-changing guy when he's not kills your franchise. It kills it. Like, he is not. I would say he's a legend for Miami. He's been here 5 years. They haven't won a title. Yes, they've been to the finals, but there's also this branding thing. And again, playoff Jimmy, even you said, like, we all hear about it. And he was great against Milwaukee in that finals run. He had some real struggles through injury against the Knicks. He wasn't the best. Yeah, he was at times the best player in the Boston series, but we all know Caleb Martin stepped up. He didn't do a huge amount during Denver. He has moments, but moments are not every game. And that's where we're at with him. And like, people love the bravado. They love the idea, these big performances, and then the ones where he has 16 points on 15 shots and gets hurt and sprained his ankle and then can't do enough. They sort of get hidden, and then that gets put away from what he actually is as a player. Really good player, being a great player, not this guy that you need to destroy the structure of your books for, I think, to bring back at that price. But and again, if you look at it realistically, I don't know how you disagree with that. But again, Jimmy just has the vibe. He has the sass. He has all this sort of stuff which brings that attention. The thing for him,
Riley won't do it though.
Yeah,
Riley, he can't do it.
No, he won't either. I think he will.
No, yeah, I think Pat Riley let Dwayne walk in 2016, and while he said publicly he regrets it, I don't think he really regretted it that much. Like there was a clear window on like how much more effective Dwayne could be in 2016, and that was Dwayne freaking Wade. Like, I mean, the best player in franchise history, and he was like, "Okay, you want to get more money? I can't give it to you. Go find it somewhere else." And I think he'll do the same thing with Jimmy. I don't think it will be as much as of a standoff as a lot of people expect it to be. I think it'll be like, "Okay, you want a deal elsewhere? If somebody's willing to pay it to you, we'll happily accommodate that deal, and we'll see what we can get back in return."
I make these arguments all the time. It's obviously falling on deaf ears, David, but the way that the NBA salary structure works is that it encourages this sort of stuff because it means you can only get paid this max amount of money when you're well past your prime. And then it leads to either a situation where a franchise legend or a really good player gets paid too much money and hamstrings the team, and then they turn into a hated villain. But why are you taking so much money? You're killing our team. Or they then have to go somewhere else to another team because that team makes the smart decision for the squad and doesn't pay them that money. Like if Dwayne Wade was, let's use today's money, or even Jimmy now, like if he was paid $60 million when he was 29 years of age for those 4 seasons, you go, you know what? Absolutely bang on worth it. We love this. And then he turns 35 and he gets paid $30 million a year for 3 years. And this makes more sense. But he can't. You're not allowed to pay those guys that amount of money at that time. You can only pay it when they are out of their prime. And that decision then leads to, again, am I disloyal? But the structure really screws up that idea of this player staying long-term, making their money when they're in their prime, cutting it back when the other guys are coming through because they've made that money. And that causes problems. And we see it happen often, but I don't want to harp too much on that, even though I already have. Let's talk bold prediction for this squad. David, your bold prediction is that Miami will avoid the play-in and go on another deep playoff run. I will say that is bold. The East is a strange conference, obviously, because there are a lot of bad teams, but there's also a really strong group of teams at the top. And Miami, they're not one of the bad ones, but they're also not one of the top ones. So, to get to that 6th spot, like it's not easy. Like, and even last year, they were battling against a team that was like throwing every game in the Brooklyn Nets, basically. Like, was that the year before? It was the year where they just could not. They couldn't. They were trying, and they could not get past that spot. And even last year, they just struggled to get out of that area. We'll bring that in to talk about team record. So you think you've got them at 46? Is that like that's your prediction? Is that enough to get into the play-in, or do you think they're going to have to go higher than that to actually achieve that goal of not being in the play-in?
Yeah, now that I think about it, it probably would have to be closer to 48 wins in order for them to avoid the play-in tournament completely. Last year was so tough to kind of just get any sort of consistency with all the injuries and players in and out, and the acquisition of Rozier and everything else like that. That by the time they were in it, like, I mean, there was the possibility they were jostling between them, New York, all these other groups, teams that were kind of there between 3 and 8, that they were close enough. A handful of games separated all these teams, and maybe, things would have been different had they been a little bit healthier and had the emotional baggage of the offseason and the failed acquisition of Dame Lillard not been hanging over this group this whole time. Maybe they would have avoided it. But I think they're past it. Again, it'll be interesting questions with everything I laid out about Jimmy and the potential tensions just brewing over. But if they're able to put that behind them and stay reasonably healthy, I think this team will never be fully healthy or completely consistently healthy for a full season. But if they can continue to get the most of their depth, I think they've got enough with the talent that they have, the depth that they were able to kind of bolster, and still make a push for 5th, 6th seed. I mean, things have to break right, but I think this is a group capable of doing that. If so, I think they'll be kind of buoyed by that regular season performance. They'll have had to have gotten a leap from some player, whether it's Bam or Tyler or somebody else, and knowing that, you kind of go in with renewed confidence. And Jimmy, again, knowing that nothing is kind of foretold as far as his future, and maybe he wants to be able to make one last big playoff Jimmy push, maybe he can go in there and say, all right, now we can go, and I'm healthy and I'm ready to carry this team and challenge the Bostons and the Philadelphias and the Knicks and everything else. So I know a lot of people will say, oh, it's ridiculous. I think they can beat Boston. Boston looked as dominant as any team has, and yet, given the history between these two groups, I think I could speak for the people in the Heat locker room. They're not scared of Boston, and I don't think that's just false bravado. I think they feel they can challenge that group and challenge the two Jays, and even with Chris Porzingis there, and I think they'll find a way. And they have the intangible aspect where they feel like they can beat Boston. I think they could do the same thing with Philadelphia. Who else is a clear contending team in the Eastern Conference? The Knicks. They kind of play evenly with Miami in terms of just physicality and kind of contributions across the board. And while the Knicks probably have more talent per se, and certainly a larger fan base, I think Miami doesn't fear the Knicks either. So, I mean, knowing that, I don't think they're scared of any of those top contending teams in the East. And I think as long as they're in the mix and they can avoid the play-in tournament, if they hit the play-in tournament, forget about it. It's another, like, what do we do? We're on this, this cycle of mediocrity. We can't get off. But if they're able to avoid it and see positive growth during the course of the season, I think that'll translate into a deeper playoff run.
There's two ways to look at this. There's, the Heat optimist person who looks and goes, well, the team that finished in the 5th seed was one win ahead of Miami last season. They won 47 games, and like the 3 seed won 49. That's 3 extra wins. Like that's easily possible to do that. Like there's not a big gap here. And then the Heat hater will be like, yeah, but for Miami to get into the top 6, they need to be better than 2 of Philadelphia, Indiana, Orlando, Cleveland, Milwaukee, New York, and Boston. That's not particularly easy, but they're going to be better than 2 of them to jump up to number 6. So like there are, it's tight, but it's also like, yeah, that's hard, but these are a couple of things to go your way, and there you are. Last thing, David, quick quiz. Not really a quiz, more just a celebration of the 24-25 NBA season. There have been 17 players in Miami Heat history who have worn either number 24 or 25. I just want you to tell me the player that first comes to mind who has worn number 24 or 25 for Miami.
24, Jamal Mashburn is the player that stands out to me.
That is correct.
25. 25. I'm drawing a blank here. I cannot picture a 25 to save my life.
Rightfully so, because the list is rather thin.
Bleak.
It's bleak. I would say the most memorable, and this is how bleak it is probably Kendrick Nunn from like a couple of years ago. But you got Eric Dampier, Jordan Mickey, Jeff Malone, Anthony Carter, Devin's dad, Wayne Simeon. Wore it for a couple of years, and then Orlando Robinson last year. So I wouldn't say the number 25 is a Heat number that is drenched in history and intrigue or anything like that. But David, there is intrigue around this squad, and you're going to be talking about all of that over on the Locked On Heat podcast. So what have you got? What have you and Wes got cooked up for this week?
Just kind of trying to stay afloat during the offseason, but we'll be getting into more offseason content, just looking at the possibilities for this team, and maybe even taking a couple of historical dives as well. I think that that 24-25 question kind of gives us another opportunity to go maybe on a deeper dive of some of the more prolific jersey histories in Heat history.
I can't wait for the episode on Wayne Simeon. I'll be tuning in for that one. David, thank you again for coming on Locked On Fantasy and chatting about this Miami team with a bunch of questions and a bunch of interesting players. Thank you again.
Absolutely.
And that does do it for today's show, David, with some great, interesting thoughts, ideas, information on the Miami Heat, a team which, again, has polarizing views and polarizing players, but they're going to be fantasy relevant. Of course they are. Every team is. Guys, hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, hit the double bangs everywhere you can. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.